And I would like to introduce Pushpa Kalra, who will introduce our speaker for today.
Hi, actually, I'm not Pushpa.
Oh, I'm sorry, Laura.
Pushpa's here, but I'm Laura Burns, and I'm sort of the official facilitator, but in reality, we have full credit has to go to our to Dr. Vasudha Narayanan, who actually helped organize this course. And so she's giving several of the talks, but she's also found other professors from the University of Florida who are knowledgeable about India and their religions, their culture, their architecture. So she's the one who really put this together. She is, many of you may already know her. She spoke last year for ILR and gave us a talk about the architecture of Southeast Asia. She's, as you may know, she's a professor, a distinguished professor at the University of Florida in the Department of Religion. She has written numerous books and articles and so forth. She's a distinguished person in her field in general. Her focus today is going to be on the diversity of culture in India, and she actually is on a fairly tight schedule today, so I'm going to stop talking and let her take over. So, Sue, it's your turn now.
And I do apologize, Laura. I was just talking to Pushpa and lost my mind. There we go.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. I've been here several times in the past, and it's always a privilege to be with all of you. And some of you are here in person, so it's great to see lovely live bodies. A special shout out to Princey's parents, Izzy and Ross. They're very special, my former neighbors. The dog Princey helped me walk after my brain surgery several years ago. So special shout out to them. Thank you. I'd like to begin sharing my screen. I'll be talking today about the diverse cultures of India. This is a 6-week course, so what I don't get into today, and there'll be plenty, I'll be getting into starting next week. And many of my colleagues will help me get through this course with everything you wanted to know about India and were afraid to ask. This is not working. Thank you. The diversity of India is just incredible. Several years ago, while visiting my parents, a neighbor's child came over, and while he was doodling, and he was all of 5 years old, he doodled this. And my kids, who were the same age, looked at him in fascination and in horror. They had no idea what these words even meant at that point. And yet this kid was doing it randomly. Greeting cards, New Year's cards, of course, come up with the same thing. Church, temple, mosque. The backside of buses tried to speak about national integration. It says, "We are all Indians, our unity is our strength." It's a nice aspiration. We tried towards that, and it seems to me that we were better at it even a few years back than we are today. The picture at the back of this bus, literally the back of the bus on a rainy day, shows a Hindu, and you can see that from the head coverings as well as through their particular forehead marks sometimes, and so on. The diversity comes on many levels. My expertise is religion. And what we'll be doing today is going through the linguistic diversity as well as the diversity in terms of the traditions, ethnic and religious traditions of India. There are 28 states and 8 union territories. The many states of India are not simply states like they are in this country. Each one has a different ethos, a different language. So the minute you go across the border, the buses and the public transportation and everything else is in a different language, in a completely different script. So you can't even know where you're going. This may look like a simple enough classification with very, very small number of languages, small, relatively. But when you take the big orange blob on top, which says Hindi, what you really will see are multiple dialects. The only difference is Hindi does share the same script, but all the other languages have completely different script, not even one that we can understand. But if you really want the number of languages, we go with Microsoft Translator. There are only 10 languages which are supported, and we go with those. And as you can see from the script, they're all quite distinct from each other. The religious diversity. India's massive population includes not just about close to 1 billion Hindus, but also the second largest group of Muslims. This is from the Pew Foundation. And it's behind only Indonesia. By 2050, the Pew Foundation says India's Muslim population will grow to 311 million, making it the largest Muslim population in the world. Still, it'll be a minority, about 18%. It's right now at about 14%. It used to be 12%. And the Hindu majority is reducing slowly. So this is the 2001 census. If you look at the pie chart, you'll see about almost 80% are Hindu. And my object today in this short time that I have spent with you is to introduce you chronologically to the diverse religions of India. So what religions do we have? When do they come in? And therefore, as we'll pick up in the next few weeks, what are the tensions? What are the synergies? What are the stress points? Those we'll pick up as we go on. The distribution of population by religion will show this. Every pie chart you see will have it slightly different. Some of them will show it as 79% Hindu, others will show it as 81%, and so on. Not just Hindus and Muslims, but Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, Jains, others, that includes Star Wars, and religions not stated. Now, Hinduism is the name given to the dominant religion of India. What I do want to stress is that this name for the religion is not found in any of the early texts. In fact, as a name for religion, it starts coming around the medieval times, but becomes popular and official only after the British come. It's not that the British named the religion, but the word Hindu, when it occurs earlier, and versions of it come as early as the Hebrew scriptures, they usually denote a geographic region. So it's like saying American. And as late as the 14th, 15th century, the word Hindu meant non-Muslim population of India, which was subject to certain kinds of taxes. So this name Hindu actually comes from a river, the name of a river. It has many deities. We'll be looking at how many there are next week. And it's a religion like many religions are, but perhaps living in Hinduism and being a Hindu, it strikes me very hard the paradoxes and the contrast within the religion seems far more than any other traditions. On the one hand, we find women dressed modestly in some parts of India. They don't even take their head covering off. And in many other parts of India, and in the medieval sculpture and text, a woman's body is lauded, that is extolled, and the woman's beauty is particularly spoken of in sculpture and in text. The traditions try to have a permanence by way of its architecture, and we'll notice this as we go on. While on the, and this is Angkor Wat, the largest Hindu temple in the world, today Buddhist. At the same time, they know that life is as fleeting as the fragrance of these flowers. There's vibrancy and joy in weddings. It's chaotic in all the weddings. I mean, there's no rehearsal or anything. Everyone's having a great time, dancing. And the colors, the very earthy nature of the traditions are so profound. And we'll be looking at the wedding mantras, what are the words they say during the wedding next week. And in these weddings, the primary point that's pointed to and emphasized is friendship. Friendship between the bridegroom and the bride. And these mantras go back to about 600 BCE. And despite that, a dominant tone in Hinduism is also the life negating withdrawal from the senses. So yes, it's very life affirming on the one hand, and also speaks about withdrawal of senses. On the one hand, the Hindu traditions worship is an assault on your senses, the fragrance, the tastes, the colors. On the other hand, it's all gray. Gandhi was known as the apostle of peace, and yet there's harmony and hostility. A dargah is a Muslim place of worship. We've heard of mosques. What are dargahs? A dargah is a place where a holy man in Islam has been interred. Sometimes a few holy women. But frequently, the land for these dargahs have been given by Hindus. And about 60% of the people who come to venerate these people, the Muslim saints, are Hindus. So we know on the ground there's a great deal of harmony. And there was much more, I would say, about 20 years back than what it is right now. And yet, post 1993, there has been a great deal of hostility when mosques were destroyed. And the newspapers said that this is something that the Hindus should not have done, destroy a Muslim house of worship. A chronology of religions, and this is where the bulk of my talk will be spent today. How and when religions came in. Hinduism, as I said, is an old name for it's a new name for an old religion. There's no single founder. There's no one holy text for all Hindus. By the 6th century BCE, Buddhism and Jainism grow up within India, and we'll talk about this today. Christianity is said to have come, and the word said is in italics here, 1st century CE. Judaism, it is said, came even before that. Some people put it back to the time of King Solomon. Islam comes 7th, 8th century to South India. Zoroastrianism at the same time, that's the religion of the Parsis. Sikhism is the latest one, and the newest kid on the block is the Baha'i tradition. So where does Hinduism begin? We don't know where or when it started. It's an amalgamation of traditions. Today, we use the word Hindu to refer legally to anyone who is not a Muslim, Christian, or Zoroastrian by faith and who lives in India. So it's a kind of a default category. In general, people think it's a combination of, or maybe a linear continuation of, what was a river valley civilization, Indus Valley civilization, and the culture of the Indo-European people. The word Hindu itself comes from the river Sindhu, which the Greeks call Indus. The Indus River, now in Pakistan, was called Sindhu. The Persians dropped the S and called it Indu. And so anyone who lived east of the river Sindhu was called Indu. This had a major civilization dating back to about 2750, 2500 BC, and roughly contemporary with Mesopotamia and with Egypt. How do we know? We have objects of trade found in different places which show there's trade going on between these civilizations. We think globalization happened yesterday. Well, you know, it happened centuries, millennia ago. And then a major part of what is Hinduism today comes from this theory. This is one theory. I should say that because there are other theories. It's believed that the Indo-European people started migrating. The homeland of these people is much contested and a part of nationalistic arguments. Many people believe, not all, that they started in this part of Europe, roughly southern part of Russia, Georgia, Ukraine. In fact, if you go back, that's exactly the part where they started. And they spread to different parts of the world. And how do we know it? A similarity in languages. And the languages are called Indo-European or Indo-Aryan, A-R-Y-A-N languages, a linguistic term which had very unfortunate repercussions, tragic ones, when Aryan is taken to be a race, and it's not. It's a Latin, it used to be a linguistic group. And so it's believed that people from this neck of the woods, Ukraine, southern Russia, Georgia, migrated to different parts of Europe and India. And the combination of that and the Indus Valley civilization gave rise to what we call Hinduism today. Other people believe that the homeland of the Indo-Europeans was actually closer to India, and the migration began from India. So the languages that we see here, Indo-Aryan, Iranian, Greek, Celtic, are all, and the Norwegian language, all those languages up there are all connected. We see that in everyday speech. Words like fire, Agni, means, it's in Sanskrit, ignite. Couple of words that I threw in here. The word for knowledge is jnana, knowledge. Ajnana is lack of knowledge. Ignorance is in English. And so on. The number systems are all connected. So we know that the Europeans and the Indians and the Iranians were all connected together. Fast forwarding, the early texts in Hinduism were called Vedas, that which is heard, and then there was the remembered composition. The Vedas were transmitted by word of mouth. It was not written down. It was an oral culture. So people learned vast amounts by heart, and it kept moving. But most Hindus do not know the Vedas. They know a mantra or two, a couple of verses, and that's about it. But what Hindus do know, most Hindus, not all, and this is the hiccup, you can't say something and say, all Hindus believe in this. Well, you know, that's just the way it is. But the epics In Hinduism, the Ramayana and Mahabharata are very well known. These were composed about 500 BCE to about 8200. And one part of an epic called the Mahabharata is called the Bhagavad Gita and is said to be one of the most important books of the Hindu tradition. The last part of the Vedas were called the Upanishads. They were composed around the 6th century BCE. Sorry, this should have read BCE, not CE, BCE. And in the Upanishads, and we'll talk about it a little bit more next week, the main focus is on the human soul and its relationship to the Supreme Being, that is the Supreme Spirit, the force of the universe. How are we connected to this force of the universe? Who are we? Are we individual or are we connected? Are we all part of one organic whole? And one of the main questions in the Upanishads is, what is it that being known, all else becomes known? Is there one answer that gives you enlightenment, that gives you the right understanding of everything and experiential knowledge? In the Upanishads, and this is the 6th century BCE, the notion of karma is articulated. And the general idea is that whenever our karma comes to an end, we'll get enlightened, we'll get liberated from the cycle of life and death. We'll realize the divinity within us. Until such time, all beings, animals, human beings, everyone gets reborn. Many Hindus think it's a form of judgment, but it's far more complicated. We really don't know how complicated it is, except to say a karma, a deed, the word karma simply means action. It can bear fruit several lifetimes later. And if we are suffering now, it doesn't mean that we did something bad. It may simply mean that you are showing an example for other people and you are actually accumulating good karma. There are different forms of thinking about it. Diversity again. There are multiple hundreds of sacred texts in Sanskrit and in vernacular languages. But one word which is common to all Hindus and to three other religions, and I'll speak about them soon, is Om. This syllable is considered to be sacred. Some people say it has meaning, and some people say it doesn't. The leading prayer in the Vedas is to equate truth with light, with immortality. This is the quest of the Hindu scriptures, kind of summarized almost, that we should move towards light. We should move towards truth. What is real? Truth is real. The 6th century BCE sees a time in which we have many spiritual Hindu texts, the Upanishads, which are the last part of the Vedas. And alongside with that are two new religions, Buddhism and Jainism. Several religious leaders lived in India about the time of the Upanishads. One was Gautama the Buddha, the founder of Buddhism, and the other, Mahavira, the founder of Jainism. Now, before we leave Hinduism and go to Buddhism and Jainism, I'd like you to have just this point in mind, that texts do not have a power over people in India. In fact, when you go to India, you don't find holy books on the shelves necessarily. You may find them in the houses of the elite people, and certainly now you find them in the houses of almost all people because of literacy. But Hinduism had its power through stories, through narratives, and we'll come to that next week when all that I'll be telling you is different stories to tell you what is Hinduism about. Because when people ask a question about Hinduism, We don't give a yes or no answer theoretically, we give a story. And so Hinduism has been very dynamic. Customs and practices are reworked over and over again. In the 6th century BCE, in what we would call quote unquote the Hindu tradition, Gautama was born. Eventually, he's dissatisfied with the teachings of the Vedas, and through his own spiritual experiences of enlightenment, gets to have enlightenment, and his followers call it Buddhism. This religion was dominant after the 6th century BCE, but particularly after the 3rd century BCE, it became a world religion. King Ashoka was a king in the 3rd century BCE. He had been born a Hindu but became a Buddhist. And his kingdom goes from what we would call Afghanistan today all the way to the south of India. And he waged a costly war, it is said, and was absolutely devastated when he saw the thousands of people who died. And in search of peace, he embraced the religion of the Buddha. So in all the edicts that he put up everywhere, what he does is to speak about the sacrality of life, the importance of life, and this is important for human beings and for animals. And so he sets up hospitals all over his empire. He sets up hospitals for human beings and hospitals for animals. And that's what is so heartwarming about it. And that was 3rd century BCE. And it's most distressing and tragic that we have not learned from our mistakes over all these centuries. Another apostle of peace, so to speak, was, I'm sorry about the slide on the right, for some reason it's inverted, was started by Mahavira in the 6th century BCE. Nonviolence was the main point that he spoke about. And I'll come back to him in a couple of weeks when we speak about Gandhi and how he got this idea of nonviolence, and later on Martin Luther King Jr. And this goes back to the 6th century BCE. Back to the map of India. Look at the little blue strip on the southernmost part, the southwest part of India, where they speak a language called Malayalam. This particular area, the blue strip, is a state called Kerala. And that state is the most diverse today in India. Judaism, Christianity, and Islam landed there, all over the Arabian Sea. How? Well, it is believed that in the 1st century CE, St. Thomas arrived. People have shed some doubt on the story. Scholars are not sure about it, but it is said that he was martyred. Look carefully here at the picture of Christ and look at his feet. You see a lotus flower. And that's acculturation. That's taking over a Hindu and Buddhist symbol and putting it on Christianity. This is a common picture. These are common pictures. Hindu deities standing on the lotus flower. Why? Because a lotus flower is supposed to be very pure. And the meaning of it will come to next week. Kerala is also the place where the Jewish tradition came. These pictures were taken, I took these 2 years back, a month before the pandemic started, January 2020. I'd been there several times, and I'm going to read to you the pictures they have in the synagogue. This is the recollection of their history, the Jewish understanding of how they came to India because they felt fully accepted there. They say, and this is from the synagogue, the strait between King Solomon's kingdom 1,000 years before the Common Era, and the biblical name for India was Odu, and the different imports from India are called there. But after the destruction of the second temple, it is said Jewish refugees came here, and the Raja, the king, welcomed them. Fast forward, and I wish I had time to show you all the slides of this, about the 4th century CE, it is said that Joseph Rabban, the leader of the Jews, was proclaimed a prince by the local king. This is a marble plate on the synagogue in Cochin, and it says it was built in 1568, and it's a kind of syncretic building, and the clock tower was added much later. Many Jewish people were prominent in India. Dame Sisodia, and we have many waves of Jewish migration, was very much into classical dance. Also, a director of classical Indian dance is Leela Sampson. There's a book coming out by Nathan Katz called Jews India. It'll be out soon, and if you're interested, you can always get it. Fast forward, 7th century CE, Parsis, quote unquote, Persians, that is, Zoroastrian faith, followers of the prophet Zarathustra, came to India and settled down in the area that we call Mumbai or Bombay. A very small group of people, about 100,000 out there. Islam also comes around the same time. It comes to South India peacefully through seafaring routes. A very different dynamic than the north of India, where it comes through the northwest with invasion and with much destruction. So we have two patterns of interaction with Islam in India, very peaceful, very harmonious in the south, and one which is of hostility in the north. And the synergy between Hinduism and Islam came out in many ways. Perhaps the best known monument today is actually a tomb, the Taj Mahal. So I always smile when people say your home looks like a Taj Mahal. It's actually a tomb. So it's not something that you would say, but it's something that Shah Jahan built for his wife, and truly an absolutely gorgeous building. Sikhism, 15th century CE, that's one of the youngest religions of India, possibly born because of the synergy between Hinduism and Islam. And Sikhism is one of the most vivid traditions of India, starting in the Punjab. The word Punjab, the name Punjab, means land of the 5 rivers. Panch means 5, Up is water. The land of the 5 waters, the land of the 5 rivers. It's born here, but it's a global religion. I took this in Columbus, Ohio, this picture, where we have a good number of Sikhs. The founder is on the left, Guru Nanak. This is the holy place for all Sikhs, the Golden Temple. And again, the relationships between Hindus and the Sikhs have been harmonious historically, but in the 1980s became very acrimonious, leading to a Sikh assassinating Indira Gandhi. So all these religions, there have been points of harmony and points of hostility. This is a Sikh Gurudwara in Augusta, Georgia. Augusta had about 24, 25 families when I took this picture, and 2 different Gurudwaras because there were 2 different factions. Singapore, and the central part of worship in Sikhism is the holy text, the Guru Granth Sahib. That book is considered to be the holiest teacher for the Sikh people. And the book is venerated more than anything else. And the latest religion, shaped like a lotus flower, is the Baha'i tradition. I conclude this talk with words of Gandhi taken in his ashram, that is, the place where he lived and worked. The word ashram literally means hermitage or monastery. He says, I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. And so India too has been a land where many religions have come, and yet people have lingered in their own traditions. Next week, we'll be looking at forehead marks, their connection to gods, Hindu gods, and how many gods are there. So food, festivals, and fun. Thank you.
Do we have time for a few questions?
Yes.
Or you want okay, let me, all right. I see Richard. Go ahead with your question.
Okay, I do remember that English is spoken in India from the time that the English were there. Has that become a universal backup language, or is it Hindi now? I'm just kind of, you talked about each language that was associated with a particular religion, but English is not necessarily a Christian, but because of the occupation of India.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry if I miscommunicated that. The languages are not related to a religion. We have people of every religion speaking every language. However, you're absolutely correct. English is a link language and one of the official languages. It had been hoped by the central government that Hindi would become an official language or a national language eventually, but there's heavy resistance from South India where they absolutely refuse. They'd rather give up their lives than speak Hindi. So, and the only reason why Hindi is popular to the extent it is in South India is because of the movies, the Bollywood movies, and everyone knows how to sing the Hindi songs and do the dances. So other than that, the South Indians will not accept Hindi at all. And then to a lesser measure, other places too. So yes, absolutely. English is a way of communicating. I grew up bilingually. Many places in India, in most schools, it's a 3-language formula. It is English, Hindi, and your native language there.
Deborah Rossi, I have a question regarding to the hand. This is in the Buddhist temple here, and I have an icon of Christ from Greece that also has that.
That's
symbol.
beautiful.
What does that mean?
Not quite that gesture, but this one.
I thought it was the fourth finger, no?
But this,
This is the meaning.
yeah,
Okay.
middle. But whether it is this or this, it's a teaching mudra. The hand positions are called mudra, and it shows, it's a whole language. There's a common vocabulary of mudras between sculpture, dancing, and so on. And between Hinduism, Buddhism, and other religions, Jainism. Usually in Hinduism, it's these two fingers, but in other, it's this, but it shows knowledge, teaching, wisdom. This holding up is fearlessness. Do not be afraid. I'm here to give you strength. Conversely, hand this way, I will give you everything you want. It's the boon giving gesture.
What is the name that you're calling that so I can?
Jnana, I'll write it out for you. Jnana Mudra, the same word I put up earlier, Jnana, that is teaching wisdom. Jnana Mudra.
Because I'd like to study.
Yeah. Oh, a quick word. This is a huge topic, but the interaction between Hinduism, India actually, and Greece is much contested. How much interchange was there? How many people travel? Did people actually go there? And how is it that there's so much of similarity in the philosophy? And eventually, after the Common Era in astronomy, mathematics, and so on, we do know that the Arabs were a big conduit in later times, after the 1st century. But before that, we're not sure. Starting with the 3rd, 4th century BCE, after the time of Alexander the Great, there's considerable back and forth. But much of the literature on the Greeks from the West has denied any connection with India, any influence.
Hey, Phyllis, go ahead.
Having lived in Sri Lanka for 2.5 years as a youngster and visited Nepal for a month several years ago, I'm somewhat familiar with their cultures. And I noticed that although they're not politically connected to India and have not been for centuries, nevertheless, they are culturally connected and they with similar languages and religions. So it's a mystery to me why your map would not include them, as well as Bangladesh for that matter, in as much as Pakistan is part of that map.
The limitations of this course and time. I'm talking about the cultures of India, North South Asia. So I had to draw the line somewhere because I'd been asked to talk about India. That had been the charge.
Okay.
And that leaves out, not necessarily culturally all the time, as you quite correctly pointed out, but politically and in terms of religion, because we don't have the time to get into any depth into Buddhism or other traditions. My colleague, Dr. Ali Mian, will be talking about Islam in India eventually. Bangladesh is a very interesting issue. Ethnically, it shares the same culture as West Bengal, a state in India. Same language. And eventually, that had been the ethnic differences had been the reason why it split away from Pakistan in 1971. And interestingly, and this is a piece of trivia, Bangladesh and India are the only two countries which share national anthems written by the same person. Rabindranath Tagore wrote the lyrics, which eventually one country adopted one song for India, and Amar Shonar Bangla was adopted by Bangladesh. Sri Lanka too is a very interesting connections, as you very correctly pointed out, a lot of cultural connections, politically quite distinct. Remember Ashoka, whom I spoke about a few minutes back, who had converted to Buddhism and began to spread the idea of peace and prosperity to all. It is believed, according to the Buddhist history and recollections, that his son and daughter went to Sri Lanka and they took with them apparently a stock of the tree, the Bodhi tree, under which the Buddha attained enlightenment, and planted that in Sri Lanka. So it's a very metaphoric way of saying that the tree of Buddhism is now growing in Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka has become a major place from which a lot of Buddhism went to Southeast Asia, just as the northern variety went from north to Tibet, to China, to Japan. So thank you for that.
Yes, if I may say, I attended a Sri Lankan school while I was there, and I learned the history, of course, of the place. And I heard that same story about the family of Ashoka coming and planting the Bodhi tree, which I visited as a child. Thank you so much for your lecture. I've appreciated this, and I'm certainly going to attend the entire course. Thank you.
Okay, and our final question, Anne Marie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I want to refer to a comment that you made earlier about Greeks and their reception of ideas from India and whether or not they gave credit. But also, I'm fascinated considering the distances at the time, how ideas were exchanged. And really this concentrates for me on this whole concept of the afterlife, which in Indian religions, at least for several of them, seem to precede anything that happened in Christianity or Judaism by centuries. So I'm wondering, given our knowledge today about comparative religions, and certainly you are more up on this than anybody I've ever heard, whether or not you can speculate as to how some of these ideas might have migrated north, particularly to Greece. So that concept of the afterlife, though, I find very intriguing as a continuance throughout those religions.
It's a great question. Sometimes people point to Pythagoras as a person who believed in afterlife and reincarnation, and he lived in the 6th century BCE, approximately, and it's believed he may have traveled to India and gotten the same ideas that the Upanishads and Buddhism and everyone came up with. But in general, many people have rejected that connection and said that's a made-up story. And we have 2 or 3 theories to explain the connections. One, actual contact, which many Western scholars have rejected, but now they're coming more, at least 1 or 2 of them have seen the possibility. Another idea is, you may recall I spoke about the Indo-European migration. And some people have said there's a proto-philosophy. And this means that in the Indo-European people, they had this common idea, and it sometimes skips many generations, but the idea comes up later. I find that harder to believe than actual contact, but some people say that. And the third theory is that, well, it's just a happy accident that there are similarities in these ideas, and given the normal kinds of socioeconomic status in different people, in different cultures, they may come up with the same theories. So this is getting down into very simple, unnuanced ways that I've been able to summarize massive amounts of literature that I've been reading on the subject, actually more recently. And so these are the 3 that I've came up with from multiple authors. 1, actual contact. B, proto-philosophy and history, that is, it comes through common Indo-European memory, genetic memory, like the flood story, which I'll talk about next time, or no connection. And once again, thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate seeing all of you and your faces here. I apologize, I can't linger to answer more questions. I'm on my way to Jacksonville for my brother-in-law's funeral. And they're waiting for me to start the services, so I'm running now. But I'll be lingering more next week and later on.
I just want to thank Vasu. We'll let her go now, and I really enjoyed this, and you have a chance to talk to her again next week, so thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Stay well.